We're coming on the air this morning with a brand new poll, and it's brutal for President Biden. His approval rating has hit a new low. Only 41% of Americans think he's doing a good job in office. 53% disapprove. 70% believe the economy is in bad shape. And with inflation at a three-decade high, only 39% approve of Biden's handling of the economy. Looking ahead to the midterm elections, Republicans have a 10-point lead among registered voters, their largest lead ever in the 40-year history of our poll. One bright spot for the president, his core policies are popular. 63% support the $1 trillion infrastructure bill he's going to sign into law tomorrow, and 58% support the $2 trillion social investment and climate initiative he's pushing for right now. And we begin this morning with the head of the National Economic Council at the White House, Brian Dees. Brian, thank you for joining us this morning. Let's begin with inflation. It's pretty clear those inflation numbers are driving discontent with the economy. What, if anything, can the president do about it?
Well, inflation is high, and it's affecting Americans in their pocketbook and their outlook. But that concern actually underscores why it's so important to move forward on the Build Back Better bill that Congress is considering. You know, this bill is actually going to address the core costs that American families are facing in childcare, in housing, in healthcare. It will cut the cost of childcare by more than half for most working families. It'll build new housing all around the country to let people find new opportunities to find jobs and live in an affordable way. And they'll do it all while being fully paid for. And this is important. Far from adding to inflation concerns, this bill will do the opposite. Because it's fully paid for, it doesn't add aggregate demand to the economy. It makes these investments while actually offsetting them by increasing taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals. In fact, it will reduce the deficit over the long term. So we have a fully paid for plan to go directly at the costs that typical Americans are facing, increase the productive capacity of our economy. This is what Americans are looking for. They're looking for us to deliver on the things that matter most to their lives.
And I know you're hoping to pass, but even if it does pass, it's going to take a while for the benefits to kick in. So what can Americans expect in the short term? Is inflation going to get worse before it gets better? Is there anything President Biden can do in the short term?
We're focused on how to address this in the short term and the medium term, George. In the short term, number one, we have to finish the job on COVID. We know that the more that people feel comfortable getting out into the economy, going to movies rather than buying a television at home, working in the workplace, the more we can return a sense of normalcy to our economy. Getting those shots out for 5 to 11-year-olds is going to provide a lot of comfort to American families. We're making a lot of progress on that front. Getting more workplaces COVID-free is going to make more Americans comfortable getting back into the labor market as well. The second thing we can do right now is focus on these supply chain issues. You know, right now, the American economy is moving more goods through the economy than we ever have. But that's creating some challenges. We're working with the ports in LA and Long Beach, getting them to go 24/7, and getting right to work in implementing this historic infrastructure bill. On Monday, the president will sign this bill into law. It's the first time that a president is actually delivering on a bipartisan infrastructure bill. And while a number of those pieces will be longer term, they're things that will go into effect right away to try to get money out to help, for example, upgrade our ports, upgrade our airports, upgrade our roads. We're going to work without delay to get that money working for the American people.
As you know, our next guest is Senator John Barrasso. He's expressed the view of an overwhelming majority of Republicans that the Build Back Better plan is going to actually fuel inflation. He calls it a socialist agenda and a socialist budget. Your response?
It's quite the opposite. Look, every serious economist that has looked at this proposal has said that it will not add to long-term inflationary pressure. 17 Nobel Prize-winning economists said the same. And the reason is because it's paid for. You know, we haven't fully paid for a bill in Washington for some time. Senator Barrasso and his colleagues in the prior administration passed $2 trillion in tax cuts, fully unpaid for, added to the deficit. Here, what we're doing is making smart long-term investments, but offsetting those with tax increases. When you do that, it's fully paid for. You actually reduce the deficit over the long term. You don't impact inflation. What you do is you actually increase the productive capacity of our economy. You get more people to work by providing affordable child care and affordable care for an elderly parent. That's what this bill will do.
You say it's fully paid for, but the Congressional Budget Office still hasn't weighed in and certified that it actually is fully paid for. And you've got several moderates in both the House and the Senate, Democrats, who say they're not going to vote for the bill until they're confident that the CBO says it is fully paid for. Are you confident the CBO is going to back your judgment?
We're confident this bill, as it moves through the process, is going to be fully paid for. And not only that, it's actually going to reduce deficits over the long term. We've already seen the Independent Joint Committee on Taxation, as well as the Treasury Department, look at the tax components of this bill and say not only are they enough to offset the investments in this package, but actually over the long term, they will reduce the deficit by trillions of dollars because we're making permanent changes to the tax code. We're actually going to address the fact that right now, profitable companies in America can pay nothing in taxes. We're going to put a minimum tax in place, 15%, that all corporations have to pay. We're going to address the fact that today there's an affirmative incentive for companies to move production and profits overseas to try to find lower tax opportunities. By putting a global tax system in place, we're not only going to generate revenue to invest in things like childcare and preschool, but we're also going to encourage more investment here in the United States. When you do that for the long term, you generate revenue that will reduce deficits across time. So we're confident that we'll get that done. And frankly, it's been some time in Washington since we've done something that's fiscally responsible. This is the process. We write a bill, the Joint Committee on Taxation passes judgment, which they already have publicly. The Congressional Budget Office will provide additional information this week. We're confident that that will be sufficient to get this through the House.
It's not just Republicans concerned about inflation. Of course, Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, the key vote on this bill, is also concerned about inflation. Seemed to suggest this week that the bill should be put off until next year because of those concerns. I know you're hoping for a vote this week. Is that still going to happen? What are the consequences of moving it into next year?
We're confident that this bill is going to come up in the House this week, that we'll get a vote, it will pass, and it will move on to the Senate. And those concerns, which we understand and we share, those concerns actually underscore why we need to move out on this bill. You know, we want to improve the productive capacity of our economy, which will actually reduce price pressures. We want to get more people to work, which will actually reduce price pressures. The provisions in this bill have strong support of independent experts. You look at something like universal preschool. You know, George, economists for decades have been saying there's probably no single investment that could do more to improve the productive capacity of our workforce than investing in universal preschool. This bill would do that. Childcare, we know that 2 million women have had to come out of the workforce as a result of COVID and this pandemic. By providing affordable childcare, affordable elder care, we're going to help get those people back into the workforce, which will reduce price pressures while also reducing the practical costs that Americans face. That's what this bill will do. That's the case we're going to make, and that's the case why delivering right now for the American people is the right thing to do.
Brian Deese, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, George.
Let's get the GOP response now from the chair of the Republican Conference of the Senate, John Barrasso. Senator Barrasso, thank you for joining us this morning. You heard Brian Deese right there on the Build Back Better plan. He says it's fully paid for, it's going to reduce the deficit, and 17 Nobel laureates back the White House judgment that it's not going to increase inflation.
Well, first, happy anniversary. I started watching with David Brinkley and continue to watch today. And in response to what the president's advisor said here, look, the American people have given this president failing grades across the board on his first quarter report card, failing because of high costs and prices, failing because of an overrun border, failing because of the tragedy in the failure in Afghanistan. So only 1 in 5 Americans think the country is heading in the right direction. And no matter what bill the president happens to sign tomorrow, that's not going to change the failing grades. The problem is the Democrats are now saying we want to go all in with this massive tax and spending bill, which is going to harm American families. People are going to pay higher prices. There are going to be higher taxes. And of course, we're going to see an increase in the debt. So the Republicans are heading in the right direction. The Democrats are full speed ahead against the ideas of what the American people want. And even Jason Furman, who was President Obama's economic advisor, he said what they're proposing here will add to inflation in 2022.
The tax increases are going almost solely to millionaires, and the White House says that the Nobel laureates believe that it will not increase inflation. What evidence do you have that it will?
Well, there are a couple of things, and let's start with this is not really just $2 trillion. I think it's much closer to $4 trillion, because what the Democrats have added in after their election losses has been tax breaks for millionaires. This is not just me saying it. The experts are saying with what is in this bill, and Americans, the more they find out about it, the less they like it. Specifically, all the new IRS agents who are going to be hired, an army of IRS agents to do more audits. The experts are telling us that 30% of middle-class Americans will end up paying higher taxes. And what Nancy Pelosi has shoved in, the special tax breaks for millionaires in California, New York, New Jersey, that is actually going to give a tax break to 2/3 of the millionaires in America. The reason I think prices are going to go way up is because of some of the things that they have put into the bill on energy and on climate, which are going to raise energy costs considerably in the year ahead at a time when the American people are already paying sky-high prices to heat their homes, to drive their cars, to buy groceries, and inflation, as we know, hurts the most vulnerable. Who gets hurt with inflation? It's the poor people, the people living on a fixed income. It's the elderly. It's all of these folks struggling to get by. I would have never believed that Joe Biden, in just 10 months in the presidency, could bring us to a 30-year high of inflation.
Let's talk about the infrastructure bill he's going to sign into law tomorrow. Bipartisan infrastructure bill. The White House has put out a fact sheet showing the benefits to your state of Wyoming. I want to show it to our audience right now. They say $1.8 billion for highways, $225 million for bridge replacement and repairs, $100 million for broadband, $335 million for water infrastructure, and $72 million for airports. Why did you vote against a bill that provides so many benefits to your state?
Well, you know, I was one of the original negotiators at the White House with President Biden, and ultimately I voted against it because they did use a lot of budget gimmicks, and they are adding $256 billion to the debt. And some of the issues in there in terms of energy, I think is going to make energy even more expensive, and I think is going to make the grid less reliable. And then, of course, the big thing is they handcuffed this infrastructure bill to this big, massive tax and spending bill, which every Republican is united in our efforts to try to drive a stake through the heart of this effort, which the Democrats are pushing because they are so addicted to taxing and spending.
Finally, I want to ask you about President Trump. As you know, John Carl, our chief Washington correspondent, had an interview with President Trump he released this week where the president seems to defend those who were saying, hang Mike Pence on January 6th. Want to show it.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his safety?
No, I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. No,
you heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
We're saying hang Mike
because
Pence.
it's common sense. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
So he says hang Mike Pence is common sense. Can your party tolerate a leader who defends murderous chants against his own vice president?
Well, let me just say The Republican Party is incredibly united right now, and it's because of the policies of this administration. And I think the more that the Democrats and the press becomes obsessed with President Trump, I think the better it is for the Republican Party. President Trump brings lots of energy to the party. He's an enduring force, but elections are about the future, not the past. And that's what we saw in Virginia and all across the country. And the Republican policies and the Trump policies of a strong economy and American energy, not begging Vladimir Putin to produce more oil, which is what Joe Biden is doing. Those are policies that we're going to continue to run on in the future.
So you have no problem with the president saying hang Mike Pence is common sense?
I was with Mike Pence in the Senate chamber during January 6th, and what happened was they quickly got Vice President Pence out of there, certainly a lot faster than they removed the senators. I believed he was safe the whole time. I didn't hear any of those chants. I don't believe that he did either. And Vice President Pence came back into the chamber that night and certified the election.
Well, we just played the chants. I'm asking if you believe, if you can tolerate the president saying hang Mike Pence's common sense.
It's not common sense. There are issues of every election. I voted to certify the election, and what we have seen on this election, there are areas that needed to be looked into, like what we saw in Pennsylvania. We all want fair and free elections. That's where we need to go for the future.
But you're not going to criticize President Trump for those views?
I don't agree with President Trump on everything. I agree with him on the policies that have brought us the best economy in my lifetime, and I'm going to continue to support those policies and continuing to work to stop what Joe Biden is doing to this country, which I believe is almost irreversibly bad.
Senator Barrasso, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
You can't spend almost 5 years in a political foxhole without developing a strong relationship. And, January 6th was a tragic day in the history of our Capitol building. And the president and I sat down a few days later and talked through all of it. I can tell you that we parted amicably at the end of the administration.
That is the latest take from Mike Pence on the January 6th insurrection and his relationship with Donald Trump. A take somewhat at odds with what John Carl's reporting in his new book, Betrayal. Here's an exclusive first look at new details of the pressure campaign against Pence and the former president's take on what his vice president was facing that day.
2 days before that fateful moment on January 6th, when Mike Pence defied President Trump for the one and only time as vice president, Pence sounded for a moment like he might just join Trump's efforts to overturn the election.
I share the concerns of millions of Americans about voting irregularities. And I promise you, come this Wednesday, we'll have our day in Congress.
That was at a campaign rally in Georgia on January 4th, and the crowd loved it. For several days, Pence had been facing even more pressure than previously known to use his role as the presiding officer on January 6th to single-handedly overturn the election. As reported for the first time in Betrayal, the final act of the Trump show, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows played a pivotal role in the pressure campaign on Pence, sending his top aide an email on New Year's Eve outlining the scheme. Written by Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis, the memo called for Pence to send back electoral votes to 6 states won by Joe Biden, leaving neither Biden nor Trump with a majority and putting the outcome in the hands of the Republican-controlled House. The next day, Trump's fiercely loyal 30-year-old aide Johnny McEntee sent another memo to Pence's chief of staff titled, "Jefferson used his position as VP to win." It was historically wrong, but McEntee's message was clear. Jefferson did it, and Pence must do the same. During a series of meetings over the coming days, Trump tried to turn the screws on Pence. On the evening of January 4th, he went public with his demand.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, he's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
It had been reported back in January by the New York Times that Trump even pressured Pence on the morning of January 6th with a crude phone call. When I interviewed Trump for Betrayal, I asked him about that.
There was a report, and excuse my language, not mine, it was in the report, that you talked to him that morning and you said you could be a patriot or you can be a Did you really say that, or is that a incorrect?
I wouldn't dispute it.
Really?
I wouldn't dispute it.
And when he stepped on the stage at his rally just before his supporters stormed the Capitol, Trump directed his and their anger toward Pence.
If Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. If he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country.
Pence did the right thing. He defied Trump when it mattered most, igniting the fury of the rioters. One of the many unbelievable things about that day is that as the Capitol was evacuated and rioters called for Pence's death, Trump never bothered to check on his safety. I asked the former president about that. Rather than condemning the chance to hang his vice president, Trump seemed to justify them.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his safety?
No, I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. No,
you heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
We're saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
He went on to talk at length about how it was, quote, common sense that Pence should have acted to overturn the election.
If Pence did what you wanted, you think you would still be in the White House?
I think we would have won, yeah.
Can you ever forgive him for that?
I don't know, because I picked him, I like him, I still like him, but I don't know that I can forgive him.
Angry and bitter in defeat, this is what Trump said when I asked him about his list of potential running mates if he were to run again.
I mean, I assume Pence is no longer on that list.
Well, I didn't say that, but
I mean, I can assume that, can't I?
But he did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
He's a very nice man. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
I like his family so much, but he did. It was a tragic mistake.
There's no response to any of this from Mike Pence yet, but George, the real question is the one that you asked just now, Senator Barrasso, to Republican leaders and to Republican rank and file voters, as Donald Trump is very clearly suggesting that he is planning to run, or at least strongly considering running for president again. Can those Republicans support somebody who defended rioters calling for the execution of his former vice president? That's the question for every Republican leader now.
Well, you saw Senator Barrasso certainly didn't want to criticize it. Meantime, you report on that Ellis memo to Mark Meadows. That's presumably one of the documents that is caught up in this executive privilege fight right now that is going to the courts that Donald Trump wants to shield. And Mark Meadows now could be facing the same fate as Steve Bannon, being held in contempt of Congress.
The committee sure suggested that they are going to consider holding him in contempt. I'm sure Meadows is watching very closely what happens to Bannon. But this is a very important document, George. On New Year's Eve, it is from from Meadows himself, forwarded to Mike Pence's chief of staff, and it outlines in very clear detail what should be done on January 6th to effectively overturn the election, to effectively have a coup. This is Mark Meadows forwarding a memo not from an outside lawyer, but from a lawyer for the campaign, Jenna Ellis.
John Carl, thanks very much. Betrayal's out this week.
We'll also have unique perspectives on the nation and the world from contributing analyst George Will, Washington Post executive editor Ben Bradley, Wall Street Journal correspondent Karen Elliott House, and commentator Hodding Carter.
There you see the first roundtable on the first broadcast of this week 40 years ago, November 15th, 1981. We're proud to carry on the mission launched by David Brinkley that Sunday morning. Here's a look back at 4 decades of this week.
From ABC News in Washington, This Week with David Brinkley.
Good morning. We're glad to have you with us. We have a new Sunday program for you, which we hope you will find useful.
The show itself is supposed to be a forum, and what This Week has always been is a forum for civic, civil debate based on facts, to hold public figures accountable, hold politicians and administration officials, members of Congress accountable for the decisions they're making every day in our name. Right. You were against the individual mandate during the campaign. Under this mandate, the government is forcing people to spend money, fining you if you don't. How is that not a tax?
Well, hold on a second, George. You do have some explaining to do if the polls mean anything.
I sure do.
Isn't it possible that you could have affected the policy if you all had spoken up sooner instead of just going along?
Let me be very specific. The answer is yes, we could have.
We all get a chance to ask the tough questions of candidates, to ask the tough questions of policymakers in our country. The President of the United States is accusing the former president of wiretapping him.
I think that this is, again, something that if this happened, Martha,
If
we put the key questions, the central questions, to the candidates themselves and to the people behind the candidates. Could you be taken seriously as a presidential candidate?
Well, I think that I've built a great, great company.
Let me just ask you more about the draft business, because people are talking about that.
On the tax pledge.
Yeah.
Would you take it again?
Those of us who live and work in Washington are always being accused of being too inside the Beltway. But on this program, we've always tried to set our sights beyond the Potomac.
We've anchored this program from countless locations around the world. I'm Martha Raddatz in Baghdad, live here in Cairo.
I'm just back from that interview with President Putin at the site of the Sochi Olympics.
We're here at the historic governor's mansion in Des Moines.
We join you this morning from Boulder, Colorado, after spending the week on a cross-country road trip, speaking with voters across the nation. I hear people talk all the time about, I don't know why this person is a better candidate than the other person, and I think that's a role This Week plays so well.
As the program took shape, so eventually did our Sunday morning family.
Well, we're three people, and each of us is quite different. Donaldson has made quite a reputation for himself by being an aggressive reporter, which he is, because some of his questions I wouldn't want to ask, but I don't mind hearing the answers.
I get to ask the question, and you're right, you get to give whatever answer you want. My question is, do you want to ban abortion?
George Will is extremely bright and quite conservative, and you can always count on him for some kind of thoughtful point of view about whatever the topic is.
George, what are these annotations here?
Well, I mean, I could give dramatic readings from this.
That would be
extraordinarily
instructive.
awful book.
Oh my gosh, Cokie Roberts is irreplaceable. She brought such a wealth of knowledge.
Here on our new set, new program, but a lot of familiar faces.
That's right. I mean, it looks new, but folks, it's kind of old in a way, too.
Particularly when Cokie was on the anchor desk. As a woman, she could ask different kinds of questions and bring that to the viewers.
Womanize is a broad term. What is your definition of the term?
I don't know. I'll simply say to you that if you take
Cokie, do you have a definition of the term?
Most women know it when they see it, Senator.
The role of the anchor of This Week is to encapsulate what has just happened, what has dominated the week, and what is going to be driving the following week.
It is a huge responsibility, and I think about it every day when I come in to not only prepare for the show, but to sit in that anchor chair and hopefully ask the questions that our viewers need to hear.
Having the chance to follow in the footsteps of David Brinkley is just such a privilege, and he set the standard. I actually had 3 first appearances on This Week. The first one was in July 1992 during the Clinton campaign, where I was grilled by Sam Donaldson and George Will.
Does the Gore choice look as good now without Perot in the race as it did to your strategists when you thought it might be a 3-man race?
Gore choice looks better than ever.
Then in 1997, I joined This Week as an analyst, and I was a kind of a friendly sparring partner with Bill Kristol.
Welcome, George.
Good to see you.
And Bill Kristol, I feel like, you've been left out of all of this discussion of George joining this, and we're really glad you're here.
Thank you, Cokie.
And in 2002, I took over the anchor chair, and I was very grateful to my daughter, Elliot. She came early so that I was able to anchor that week. Welcome to our program and our first guest, the President's National Security Advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice.
We'll be back shortly with our free-for-all discussion here in the studio.
The Roundtable has played a central role in This Week.
Welcome to our roundtable.
Thanks, Sam.
We're glad to have you. Now, that may be the last kind word anyone says to you today.
More than I expected.
You're there to provide some analysis.
I have a simple question for each of you. Very, very simple. Why? How would you characterize President Clinton's start? Do we need all these polls?
I looked at this poll, and George, I don't like to read polls in the morning without wine.
Wine in the morning?
No, I'm from Louisiana.
The roundtable is almost always unpredictable, which is why I believe it is always must-see television.
I think I have lost control of this.
There are probably dozens of people in Dallas alone who don't read your magazine.
Let's wait. I don't like the way this conversation is going.
Back in the wrong direction.
The great achievement.
And what is it? But just one final thing, because I do have a great achievement.
And that may be true, but my point is...
You can't make the last point because we're out of time.
You guys can all go. We're going to say here we are.
Now more than ever, we need shows like This Week where people can know that they're going to come and get information, real information, about the decisions politicians and policymakers are making every single day that affect their lives. That tradition is going to continue.
For all of us at ABC News, until next week, thank you.
How great to see David Brinkley right there. What a privilege to be part of this program for the last 25 years.